The year was 1781, and the air over Yorktown, Virginia, carried a tension so thick it could be sliced with a bayonet. Smoke curled lazily from distant campfires, mingling with the tang of damp earth and the acrid sting of gunpowder. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the British warships of Lord Cornwallis waited, unaware that their fate and the fate of an empire was about to unravel. In this decisive confrontation, America, allied with France, would strike a blow so devastating that it would force Britain to surrender, ending the Revolutionary War's major fighting and securing the long-sought independence of a nascent nation. Entire empires would tremble at the news. The world had changed in a heartbeat. The sun had barely breached the horizon when Continental and French soldiers readied themselves, eyes flickering with fear, determination, and hope. Can you feel it, the heartbeat of history pounding under your feet, as infantrymen adjust their muskets, cannons being loaded with meticulous care, and scouts racing across marshy fields, braving hidden dangers just to gather vital intelligence? A single misstep here could unravel months of strategy. Yet every soldier knew their role carried the weight of generations to come. Amid the chaos, legends were quietly born. A young American private steadied his trembling hands on a musket, thinking of home. A French artillery officer etched silent prayers onto his cannon. Cornwallis, in his seaside encampment, pored over maps, the looming specter of defeat gnawing at his pride. Visualize wide shots of the battlefield, rolling hills, hastily dug trenches, city walls rising against the morning mist. Hear the subtle sounds of boots crunching against frost-hardened earth, the distant murmur of drums, the occasional bark of orders across the encampment. By the time the first volleys would roar and the ground would shake beneath the thunder of artillery, the stage for history's drama was set. How could a ragtag coalition of colonists and French allies corner one of the world's most formidable military powers? How would the delicate dance of strategy, courage, and sheer luck tip the scales in America's favor? The world has changed in a heartbeat. If this shocking turn of history already sends chills down your spine, hit subscribe and join us as we unravel every twist and battle. Share your first thoughts below before we step onto the smoke-filled battlefield. The dawn over Yorktown slowly brightened, casting elongated shadows across marshlands and redoubts. Soldiers whispered prayers, engineers adjusted cannon placements, and scouts traced the enemy's every movement. The air was electric with suspense, an entire continent's destiny hung on the edge of a bayonet. To understand Yorktown, one must first step back into the tangled web of the Revolutionary War, a conflict born of taxation without representation, economic strain, and a burning desire for autonomy. The seeds of rebellion had been sown over decades, as 13 American colonies chafed under Britain's strict control. From the Stamp Act of 1765 to the Boston Tea Party in 1773, tensions escalated into open conflict by 1775. The colonies, though brimming with resolve, were undertrained, poorly supplied, and politically fragmented. Against them stood Britain, a global superpower, seasoned in European warfare, with disciplined regiments, formidable artillery, and a navy that dominated the seas. Yet the war was not fought in isolation. France, long humiliated by Britain in prior conflicts such as the 7 Years' War, saw the American struggle as an opportunity to avenge old grievances and weaken a rival. In 1778, France formalized its alliance with the United States, providing ships, soldiers, and resources. Spain and the Dutch Republic would eventually join in, turning the rebellion into a global contest of empires. The chessboard of war was set. Commanders on both sides began to plot not only battles, but the destinies of nations. In America, General George Washington faced monumental challenges. He needed to coordinate militias from far-flung colonies, integrate French forces unfamiliar with the terrain, and maintain morale amidst shortages and harsh winters. Meanwhile, Cornwallis, commanding the British Southern Campaign, sought to suppress rebellion through a mix of occupation, intimidation, and decisive military strikes. His forces were strong, but stretched thin, navigating hostile territory and relying heavily on supply lines. Vulnerable to guerrilla raids led by figures like Nathaniel Greene and Francis Marion, the strategic geography of Virginia would soon become crucial. Yorktown, a small port town on the York River, was far from British reinforcements. The river provided both an escape route and a potential trap, a precarious situation that few recognized at first glance. Civilians watched as foreign troops marched across fields near their homes, whispers spreading of French allies, cannon placements, and the mounting American confidence. One local innkeeper recalled seeing officers poring over maps late into the night, candles flickering, their faces etched with tension. Previous battles had shaped strategy and morale. At Saratoga in 1777, the Americans achieved a critical victory that convinced France to join openly. In the South, battles like Camden and Guilford Courthouse taught Cornwallis to expect persistent resistance. Despite his professional army's superiority, rumors of Franco-American coordination fueled both excitement and dread. Soldiers spoke of unseen allies, of naval fleets moving like phantoms along the Atlantic, and of their generals' whispered hopes for a moment that could end the war. By 1781, every decision carried monumental weight. The Americans and French were not merely fighting for territory. They were waging a campaign that would define the concept of independence and self-determination for generations. Yorktown was poised to become the fulcrum of this struggle, the tipping point where preparation, strategy, and sheer courage would collide in a crescendo of fire and human endurance. Visualize maps of colonial America, arrows tracing troop movements from New York to the southern campaigns, and overlays showing French fleets sailing from the Caribbean. Imagine the contrast: Washington's disciplined yet weary soldiers moving through Virginia's marshes, Cornwallis troops entrenched yet increasingly isolated, and local townspeople caught in the storm of history, their farms, homes, and livelihoods quietly transformed into the stage for epic struggle. The stakes could not have been higher. Would Washington and Rochambeau, commanding the French expeditionary forces, finally coordinate a decisive blow? Could Cornwallis, embattled and trapped, navigate both terrain and time to escape encirclement? The answers would unfold not in months, but in the days that followed, as Yorktown prepared to etch itself indelibly into the annals of history. By late September 1781, the fields and marshes around Yorktown had transformed into a theater of meticulous preparation. American and French forces converged under a tapestry of tension, fog, and anticipation. General George Washington, tall and measured in demeanor, walked along the lines of soldiers, his keen eyes assessing not just troop formations, but the very morale of men who had endured years of hardship. Beside him, French General Jean-Baptiste Donatien de Weimar, Count de Rochambeau, studied maps spread across a makeshift table in his command tent, the wax from a recently lit candle dripping onto corners of a hastily drawn plan. The two men, bound by necessity and trust, plotted a siege that would require absolute precision, cooperation, and endurance. Troop numbers were formidable yet fraught with challenges. Approximately 8,000 American soldiers, hardened by years of skirmishes and the harsh winter at Valley Forge, prepared alongside 7,800 French troops freshly arrived from the Caribbean. Cornwallis British garrison, numbering around 9,000, occupied Yorktown's fortifications, relying on the natural protection of the York River and the surrounding bluffs. Both sides understood that logistics could dictate survival. The Americans and French needed continuous supplies of food, gunpowder, and artillery, while the British depended on naval reinforcement, a line that the French fleet aimed to sever completely. Camps buzzed with preparation. Soldiers polished muskets and bayonets, stacked barrels of ammunition, and sharpened cannonballs. Engineers measured earthworks and designed trenches that would inch closer to British redoubts. Under the cover of night, scouts crept through marshes, cataloging enemy patrols and noting the angles of artillery emplacements. At dusk, the scent of damp wood, gunpowder, and campfires mingled with anxious human breath. Every movement, every whispered conversation, carried the weight of consequence. Psychological preparation played as crucial a role as military readiness. Washington delivered speeches that reminded soldiers of the stakes, invoking liberty, homeland, and honor. French officers, often flamboyant in uniform yet disciplined in mind, motivated their men with tales of valor and vengeance against Britain's dominance. Rituals were subtle yet powerful: shared meals, synchronized drills, and the careful raising of flags symbolized unity across language and culture. One American private wrote in his journal, "I have never felt so small, yet part of something so immense. Tomorrow, the earth itself may shake beneath us, and I pray I endure." Terrain became both ally and enemy. Yorktown sat amid rolling hills, marshy inlets, and forests that could conceal an army or a trap. The Americans and French used the high ground to stage artillery, while engineers plotted zigzag trenches to minimize exposure to musket fire. Comparisons to prior engagements were inevitable. Lessons from the brutal Southern campaign, where Cornwallis had exploited mobility and knowledge of the land, informed every strategic choice. Even civilians played a role, often unwittingly. Local farmers observed troop movements and whispered of French ships sighted off the coast, while children hid in barns, ears pressed to walls, trying to understand the ominous sounds echoing across the countryside. Leadership dilemmas were constant: whether to push forward in the face of weathered troops, whether to risk night assaults, and how to coordinate multinational forces without misunderstanding or mistrust. Visualize this cinematic tableau: a misty dawn, soldiers standing in formation, cannon wheels creaking as they are positioned along earthworks, officers gesturing emphatically over maps. The distant York River glints with the reflection of French sails arriving, a silent promise of blockade and support. Night falls, torches flicker in the trenches, the rhythmic pounding of hammers constructing fastens echoing across the riverbanks. Suspense thickens. Each day brings the Americans and French closer to the British lines, inching toward what would become a meticulously orchestrated siege. The air is charged with anticipation, for when the first cannon fires, it will not just signal the start of battle, it will ignite a decisive moment that history will never forget. October 6, 1781, the morning sun rose pale over Yorktown, casting long shadows across fields still damp from early dew. From their vantage points, American and French lookouts observed British soldiers moving within the fortifications, the redcoats stark against the muted earth tones of the trenches and palisades. A hush seemed to grip the allied forces as if the very landscape itself awaited the first echoing roar of cannon fire. Then, with methodical precision, the siege commenced. The opening phase focused on tightening the noose around Cornwallis troops. French artillery, placed on the commanding hills overlooking Yorktown, unleashed the first barrage, each cannonball striking earth, timber, and stone with devastating effect. The rumble traveled across the river, shaking walls and rattling nerves. Simultaneously, American infantry began constructing parallel trenches, inching ever closer to the British redoubts under cover of darkness. The air was heavy with the scent of gunpowder and churned earth. The cries of men, the occasional whinny of frightened horses, punctuated the relentless hammering of siege operations. Leadership decisions shaped every maneuver. Washington personally supervised sappers as they dug zigzag approaches, ensuring that momentum did not stall. Rochambeau coordinated French infantry to cover vulnerable points along the river, maintaining a buffer against any potential British breakout. Cornwallis, aware that reinforcements were uncertain and the French fleet blockaded Chesapeake Bay, fortified his positions, constructing inner redoubts and preparing his men for a fight that would test endurance to its limits. Rumors of impending surrender spread uneasily among officers, yet no one dared voice despair openly. By mid-October, the Allies had brought siege artillery within striking distance, and bombardments intensified. The ground quaked under heavy fire. Smoke curled skyward, thick and acrid, mingling with the cries of the wounded. One American private recalled, "The earth shook as if angered by the cannon, and the sky itself seemed to darken from the smoke. Each shot felt like the breath of history on our necks." The British, resolute yet isolated, returned fire with disciplined volleys, targeting exposed artillery crews and trench workers. In the chaos, moments of heroism surfaced. A French officer deflected a cannon misfire that threatened his men, while an American corporal rescued a wounded comrade under a hail of musket fire. A pivotal moment arrived on October 14th. Under the cover of artillery, Allied troops launched an assault on the two outermost British redoubts, Redoubt 9 and Redoubt 10. scaling ladders and facing a hail of musket and cannon fire. Soldiers fought with relentless courage. The capture of these positions marked a turning point, bringing artillery even closer to the British lines and tightening the siege to near perfection. Visualize close-up scenes. Soldiers climbing earthworks, dirt streaked with blood and sweat, cannon fire roaring, flags snapping in the wind, and commanders shouting orders that blend with the symphony of destruction. The psychological atmosphere was electric and terrifying. Exhaustion clung to every soldier, yet hope flickered like candlelight in darkness. Civilians, peering from the edges of forests and farms, could scarcely believe the scale of the struggle. Smoke choked the air, the taste of gunpowder stinging throats, as relentless shelling reduced fortifications to rubble. Cornwallis men, trapped and demoralized, realized that escape by river had been cut off by the French Navy under Admiral de Grasse, and morale began to fray. By October 17th, surrender negotiations began. Cornwallis, confined within Yorktown's devastated defenses, sent flags of truce. Washington and Rochambeau, cautious yet resolute, demanded unconditional surrender of arms, fortifications, and troops. The formal capitulation occurred on October 19, 1781. British soldiers marched out with dignity, drums beating, colors furled, and muskets shouldered, an image of disciplined defeat etched into history. For the Americans and French, jubilation was tempered by the sobering weight of lives lost, injuries sustained, and the realization of the monumental stakes already won. Visualize the aftermath, the battlefield strewn with spent cannonballs and broken muskets, earth scarred by artillery, tents billowing in the wind. Soldiers, both victors and vanquished, moved amidst debris and rubble, faces etched with exhaustion, relief, and awe. This was not merely a military victory. It was a turning point that resonated across continents. The morning after the surrender, Yorktown was transformed from a battlefield into a somber tableau of human consequence. The cries of the wounded still echoed faintly from makeshift hospitals, mingling with the scent of smoke and trampled earth. Roughly 8,000 British soldiers had surrendered, their muskets stacked and drums silenced. The Americans and French, though victorious, bore the heavy toll of siege warfare. Estimates suggest more than 500 killed or mortally wounded, with countless others injured, their uniforms torn and faces streaked with grime and blood. Asterisk commanders surveyed the scene with a mixture of relief and solemnity. Washington walked slowly along the lines of prisoners, noting their disciplined bearing even in defeat. Rochambeau, standing atop a hastily constructed embankment, observed his artillery crews as they cleaned and restowed their cannons. Civilians, emerging cautiously from nearby farms and villages, witnessed the massive human tide flowing from Yorktown's gates. One local woman recounted later, the soldiers filed past, heads bowed, eyes hollow yet proud. The earth seemed to sigh under the weight of so many lives. Casualty treatment and prisoner management were immediate concerns. Field hospitals worked tirelessly, improvising with limited supplies to stabilize the wounded. Officers coordinated with French counterparts to ensure humane treatment of captured British soldiers. Mindful of the war's political implications, supplies were distributed judiciously, and temporary encampments were established to accommodate thousands of prisoners. Territorial control shifted decisively. Yorktown and its surrounding region fell firmly under Allied authority, securing a strategic foothold in Virginia. With the British fleet blockaded and reinforcements cut off, Cornwallis' defeat reverberated across the colonies and Europe alike. Messages carried by horseback and ship spread news of the surrender, igniting celebrations in Philadelphia, Boston, and Paris. Flags waved, bells tolled, and the reality of imminent independence began to sink into the hearts of the American people. The psychological impact on soldiers was profound. For American and French troops, exhaustion mingled with elation. Many wrote letters home, their words brimming with pride yet tinged with grief for fallen comrades. British soldiers faced a mix of shame and relief. While spared annihilation, they grappled with the bitter taste of defeat and the humiliation of surrendering to colonial rebels allied with foreign powers. Leadership reactions reflected both caution and triumph. Washington remained measured, recognizing that while Yorktown marked the end of major fighting, The war was not formally over until treaties were signed and political stability achieved. Cornwallis, reputedly humiliated, retreated to his quarters, reportedly refusing to attend the formal surrender ceremony, delegating the honor instead to his second-in-command. Meanwhile, Allied leaders assessed the battlefield, cataloged losses, and began the delicate task of consolidating control while preparing for the final political negotiations that would cement independence. Visualize the scene in cinematic detail. Ruined redoubts smoldering under a rising sun, troops marching past wreckage, the rhythm of drums replaced by the soft murmur of exhausted men and women, and the distant York River reflecting the first light of peace. Civilians cautiously emerged to survey the devastation, their homes untouched yet forever shadowed by the violence that had passed through their lands. Within days, word of Yorktown spread like wildfire. Ships departing for Europe carried news that would reshape diplomatic relations, alliances, and the broader geopolitical landscape. Though the guns had fallen silent, the echoes of Yorktown's decisive victory reverberated far beyond the riverbanks, signaling not just the end of major combat, but the dawn of a new nation ready to rise from the smoke and blood of war. The surrender at Yorktown rippled across continents, changing the trajectory of nations and empires. Strategically, it forced Britain to confront the futility of continuing a war thousands of miles from home, draining both treasury and morale. Parliament's debates in London grew bitter and protracted, as ministers weighed the cost of prolonging conflict against the price of colonial independence. By 1783, the Treaty of Paris formalized what Yorktown had begun: recognition of American sovereignty, the cession of vast territories, and the end of Britain's attempt to suppress the rebellion. For George Washington, Yorktown solidified a legacy of resilience, patience, and strategic brilliance. His ability to coordinate with a foreign ally, manage complex logistics, and maintain troop morale under extreme pressure became a case study in leadership. Rochambeau, the French general whose disciplined forces had played a pivotal role, returned to France with accolades, cementing Franco-American cooperation as a powerful diplomatic precedent. Cornwallis' reputation, in contrast, suffered a profound blow. His career would forever be shadowed by the ignominy of surrender. Despite prior military achievements, socially and culturally, the impact was profound. Yorktown became a symbol of hope and determination, inspiring citizens across the 13 colonies. Patriotic fervor surged, and veterans carried tales of heroism and sacrifice into towns and cities, shaping a narrative of unity and resilience. The victory demonstrated the value of alliances, highlighting the indispensable role of the French fleet in cutting off British escape, and underscoring the importance of coordination in modern warfare. Economically, control over Virginia's ports and lands allowed Americans to stabilize trade and supply chains, paving the way for Reconstruction. Merchants and farmers cautiously resumed activities disrupted by years of occupation and skirmishes. The battle's symbolism extended into art, literature, and public memory. Paintings captured the surrender ceremony, songs commemorated bravery, and monuments were later erected to honor those who had shaped history in a single, decisive week. What-if scenarios tantalize historians and strategists alike. Had the French fleet failed to arrive, or had Cornwallis chosen a daring escape by land, the outcome might have been starkly different. The coordination of naval and land forces at Yorktown demonstrated an early example of joint operations, a lesson that echoes in military doctrine to this day. Each cannon fired, each trench dug, and each decision to press or hold ultimately exemplified the intricate dance between chance, courage, and calculated risk. On a global scale, the victory emboldened other colonies and nations questioning imperial authority. Revolutionary ideals spread across the Atlantic, sowing the seeds for future uprisings and influencing political thought for generations. Yorktown became a touchstone not merely for American independence, but for the broader concept of self-determination, a decisive testament that coordinated action, determination, and strategic foresight can bend the arc of history. Visualize this aftermath: rebuilt towns along the York River, children playing near former encampments, ships traversing restored trade routes, and monuments rising to honor courage and sacrifice. Maps illustrating shifting territories highlight the geopolitical changes that Yorktown cemented, while diaries and letters recount the resilience of those who endured and triumphed. The battle's lessons unity, strategic patience, and the power of alliances echoed far beyond the fields of Virginia, leaving an indelible mark on military, political, and cultural history. Yorktown was more than a military victory. It was a paradigm shift. It proved that a determined coalition, when properly coordinated, could challenge a global superpower and secure the freedom of a people long denied it. The reverberations of this decisive moment would continue to shape leadership, strategy, and diplomacy for centuries to come. Yorktown stands as a testament to the extraordinary convergence of strategy, leadership, and human courage. The battle did not occur in isolation. It was the culmination of years of perseverance, calculated risk, and the seamless coordination of multinational forces. The Americans, under George Washington's steady hand, and the French, commanded by Rochambeau with precision and discipline, demonstrated that victory is rarely won by force alone. It is won by vision, patience, and the unwavering commitment of individuals united by a cause greater than themselves. Strategically, Yorktown showcased the power of combined operations. The synchronization of land and naval forces created a situation where Cornwallis' escape was impossible, proving that warfare is as much about controlling movement and supply lines as it is about brute strength. Leaders and commanders today can draw lessons in patience, the importance of alliances, and the need to anticipate both the enemy's moves and the broader political landscape. On a human level, the battle revealed the resilience of ordinary soldiers thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Exhausted men and women soldiers, engineers, and even civilians faced harsh weather, relentless cannon fire, and the ever-present specter of death. Yet in these moments, acts of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice became immortalized. From the private enduring his first volley to the officers coordinating complex maneuvers under pressure, Yorktown highlighted the indomitable spirit that fuels history-changing events. The broader implications extend beyond the battlefield. Yorktown accelerated the end of the Revolutionary War, reshaping international relations and redefining concepts of sovereignty and liberty. It demonstrated the impact a single decisive victory can have on diplomacy, economy, and society. The fall of Yorktown did not just weaken Britain's military position, it emboldened a fledgling nation and inspired global movements towards self-determination and democratic governance. Reflective panoramas of Yorktown today show the peaceful river, gently rolling fields, and quiet monuments honoring those who fought and fell. Campaign outcome maps illustrate the transformed political landscape, emphasizing the strategic brilliance of Allied coordination. History whispers through these vistas that preparation, courage, and unity in pursuit of a higher goal can alter the fate of nations. As we leave Yorktown behind, the lesson is clear: decisive action, grounded in strategy and bolstered by resilience, can change the world. Leadership is measured not merely in victories, but in the wisdom to marshal diverse forces, the patience to endure, and the courage to seize the decisive moment when it arrives. Yorktown is a reminder that history is shaped not by inevitability, but by those willing to step forward into uncertainty with resolve and vision.